Hi, my name is Emma Jacobs, and this is my CAA number 3 historical timeline. So the first thing we have here is the Brown versus the Board of Education. This happened in 1954. The NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Brown and many other parents. What basically happened with Brown is his daughter was denied access to a public school due to her color. This overall it outlawed segregated schools as inconsistent with equal education. This was one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movement. So this played a pretty big role to get everything up and running. The justices declared that segregation by law violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And in this amendment, it guarantees rights to all U.S. citizens regardless of color. Next, we have the National Defense Education Act of 1958. This was passed in response to Sputnik. So the American education system had already been criticized due to basically how ill-equipped our students were coming out of high school and how unprepared they were going into post-secondary education, so college or anything after high school. So anyway, American education had already been criticized, but even more so after the launch had taken place. So yeah, people didn't have the background knowledge to build on like other countries. The first effort at the national level to strengthen mathematics, science, and foreign language instruction took place when this act was put into place. This also provided funding to improve American schools and to promote post-secondary education. And then we're moving right along into 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. This act banned race, sex, and national origin discrimination in public facilities, basically ended segregation. And it made it possible for blacks and whites alike to attend the same public schools without being looked down upon. Sure, not everyone's viewpoints obviously were changed just because of an act, but there were many, many people who already believed that segregation was wrong, and basically this just made it illegal for segregation. And next we have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. What this did is it addressed the academic needs of poor children. This was called the quote-unquote cornerstone of President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. This was also created by the U.S. Department of Education to distribute funding to schools in school districts with a high percentage of students from low-income families. So Title I schools, basically. We're moving on to the year of 1968 with the Bilingual Education Act. This act is also known as Title VII. The U.S. government began its first commitment to assisting ELL students. Now, this wasn't just beneficial for the students, but it also benefited the teachers in many different ways. It was previously introduced by Senator Randolph Yarborough, but later signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It was brought to attention that programs have been in place for special needs students, but not for ELL students. And, then it made perfect sense for programs to be set for special needs students. I mean, and it still does. But for some reason, I don't want to say no one, but it hadn't been brought to anyone's attention necessarily that programs for ELL students needed to be put in place as well for them to be able to succeed. This act also had a huge impact on ELL students and continues to do so today. Next, we have the Lau versus Nichols case in 1970. This began when a poverty lawyer discovered that a client's child was failing classes due to the inability to understand the language of instruction. Steinman, the poverty lawyer, filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Lau and 1,789 other Chinese background students. Children were denied education on equal terms. The court anonymously decided that the lack of supplemental language instruction in public school for students with limited English proficiency violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We also previously talked about that act in this lecture. Now, the reauthorization of the Bilingual Education Act took place throughout 1973 and 1974. So it kind of stretched over a period of time. This reauthorization did win influential allies on Capitol Hill. The Title VII's 45 million sponsored 211 school projects in 26 different languages. And although that may sound like a pretty significant number, it only served about 6% of eligible ELL students, which is kind of hard to imagine. Much of this funding went toward ELL students, but little to none went to the training and professional development of the teachers expected to instruct them. So, in part, it is a really good thing that all this money was going into all these school projects for all of these ELL students, but there were so many teachers that were so ill-equipped to basically teach these students. Next, we have the Equal Education Opportunities Act of 1974. This basically prohibited discrimination against faculty, staff, and students. This included racial segregation of students along with staff. This act required different school districts to take action to move past barriers to students' equal participation. Next, we have the Serna versus Portales Municipal Schools. This happened in 1974. The parents of Judy Serna filed a lawsuit against the Portales Municipal Schools due to the district's failure to provide bilingual and bicultural education. The parents of Judy claimed that this was a denial of the Equal Education Act, which they were correct in their claim. Then a remedial action plan was put into place for the district to implement bilingual and bicultural programs. Next, we have in 2001, the No Child Left Behind Act. This reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This required states by law to develop assessments in basic skills, Title I provisions applying to disadvantaged students, and in order to receive federal funding, states are required to give specific assessments to specified grade levels.